From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Spouse has got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Art and music, golden view, and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not okay, computer. You're really wearing a
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. I'm your host, Steve Schnee. My co-host, Ronnie Barnett, is currently on assignment. My special guest today should be no strangers to viewers of the show, since this is their third appearance on Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. I've been a fan of these gentlemen for over 4 decades. I first became aware of them when they were members of iconic Australian band Mental as Anything. But since 1990, they've been recording albums together as DOG Trumpet. This month, they released Shadowland, their 8th and finest album yet. From folk and blues to psych and pop, Shadowland is the perfect gateway into the world of DOG Trumpet, and certainly one of the best albums of the year. It is my honor to welcome once again to the program Reg Mombassa and Peter O'Doherty, collectively known as DOG Trumpet. Welcome back to the Blanket Fort, gentlemen.
Hi, Steve. How you going?
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having us. I was worried when you introduced us that you said their 8th and final album, I thought you were going to say, but you said finest.
Now, okay.
Well,
now-
What do you know that we don't?
It may be the final one. The world may be about to end. Who knows?
yeah,
that's
yeah,
true.
that's true. Now, Shadowland is now available worldwide. How are you feeling about the album and the reaction you've had to it so far?
Well, going on your reaction, we're feeling pretty good, really.
Yeah, it's
No, look,
good to
been
hear.
good.
It's good to hear. It's one of the strongest albums of the year. That's encouraging.
But
No, we've had a pretty good response, from all sorts of different places and people. So, no, we're pretty happy with it. We think we made a good album, but you always think you make a good album at the time, and then you need a bit of time to let things sort of shuffle up and see how they sit.
yeah,
And,
Yes, history will judge. History will judge it, not us.
in my opinion, Shadowland it's the culmination of everything that came before, like all the best parts of DOG Trumpet. I mean, not only is it the strongest album, it's also an album that I think defines what DOG Trumpet is all about musically. Now that you've signed to Demon Music Group, did you approach the writing and recording of the album differently, knowing that this might actually reach a wider audience?
what
No.
you're saying? Did we try harder because we had an international record company interested in this?
No, I mean, no, we never really have any specific concept or ambition for any album. Really, we just record the songs that we've written recently and hope that they fit together somehow.
You both have very different and distinct songwriting styles. Like on the earlier albums, like even if you didn't know who wrote it, you can kind of tell by the chord changes or chord structure that it was going to be a Peter song or it was going to be a Red song. But somehow over the course, basically, of the last few albums, those different paths have really converged. And even though you're still distinct songwriters, this sounds like a collection of DOG Trumpet songs and not like 6 Reg songs and 6 Peter songs. Was that just an organic and natural progression?
Yes. As Reg was saying, it's not like we really, have any great strategy from album to album and from any collection of songs that we may be writing at any one time. So I think because of the COVID sort of situation over the last 2 years, you know, our last album, our previous album to this one, Great South Road, was released in 2020, just when COVID was getting going. So we abandoned all the touring that we had scheduled, as did just about every other musician in the world, and we sort of went into that lockdown thing that we thought might last a few weeks, and in fact, sort of, you know, ended up kind of bookending it over 2.5 years almost. So it actually gave us the opportunity just to sort of knuckle down and, you know, do a lot more songwriting and a lot more test driving of those songs via we start with what we might call as a demo when we start recording, and then that may end up as the final song or not. But we ended up doing 2 to 3 versions of some of the songs, and just really concentrated, because of, you know, not having to go and do other things and having any other commitments, gave us time to really, I think, focus a little bit more than we have done maybe on previous albums.
Apart from the two of you, who else plays on Shadowland?
Nobody.
We forgot to know. We should have credited nobody for all the extras. No, it was
I mean, while we were recording it, there was sort of like, you know, there were travel bans on where you couldn't go further than about 5 kilometers from your house.
Mm-hmm.
So that partly sort of made it difficult to get other people in, but it's, you know, it's I mean, generally we don't have that many guest musicians.
On previous albums, we have had different drummers and keyboard players, wind instruments, different things. But for this one, because of that situation, we just we didn't feel it was, you know, necessary or appropriate to go chasing up other people. So we just sort of assembled those songs together and started putting a bit of keyboard. I mean, I'm no keyboard player, but I just sort of put on some simple organ on some of the songs, and that kind of ended up being another colour on the album, which features on quite a few tunes actually. So it's almost like we do have a sort of a ghost 5th member now, you know, keyboard not actually playing when we go and play live, but maybe we should get one.
In the past, on previous episodes of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo that I've done with you, we've talked about your career with the Mentals. We've talked about DOG Trumpet, and I just thought it'd be great to focus on the new album, and maybe you can take us through each of the songs.
So welcome to Shadowland. Cameras everywhere, cameras in the ocean, cameras in the air. Shadowed when you eat and drink, and shadowed when you drive, shadowed when you're sleeping, by the cameras in your mind.
Let's go through the tracks. The opening track is Shadowland. Reg, what can you tell us about that song?
It's sort of essentially a sort of paranoid rant about, you know, surveillance capitalism, which is the title of a book I read recently, just about all the, you know, all the stuff that goes on with our devices, our phones, and the, you know, cameras watching people all the time, and phones recording your conversation, and then selling that information to advertisers, which is, it's a bit creepy, but it's not like super bad. It's not like we've got, unfortunately, we don't have a dictatorial government that uses all those means to, you know, further suppress its citizens. So we don't have that. But I mean, it's still, you know, the world has still been hugely affected by, you know, and just the huge power and monopolies that those big, you know, tech corporations have is kind of not very good.
Yeah, and on a personal level, everyone's got a phone, and it's easy to have your phone hacked and have, you know, spam and junk and all sorts of things come in, and people are getting, you know, hoodwinked out of dollars, you know, all the time, especially if you're a bit older and not so au fait with, you know, the technology. It's really easy to be, you know, to be burglarized.
Yeah.
And one of the creepiest things too was they said, look, some children's toys, you know, the toys are taping the children's conversations and then targeting ads at their parents based on what the children like, you know, so that's kind of a little bit invasive.
But if we want to keep up with technology, we kind of have to become victims to it.
That's also why we're able to make our albums the way we make albums and make film clips too. We're using the sort of household technology that we all have at our fingertips to. I mean, I've got a desktop computer and Pro Tools and a few microphones, and that's how I record our albums. And it's very, basic, very simple, but it's, I couldn't have done that 35 years ago.
Yeah.
Without having to go to a proper studio and, spend a lot of money and, and it's a completely different story when you're doing that. And it's the same with making film clips. I just started, but my son just said, "Oh, you can make film clips, Dad, just by using your iPhone and iMovie to edit on the desktop computer." And since I discovered that, I've been making film clips with my wife Susan, for the Dog Trumpet film clips for the last almost 3 years now, and that sort of opened up a whole other way of making making art around what we do, expanding the palette.
Kensington Station on platform 2, a book and a record and second-hand shoes. Camden Long Market Sunday afternoon. We went home with Nina Simone. We went home with Nina Simone.
So the next song is Nina Simone. Peter, what can you tell us about that song?
Well, it's a sort of I suppose it's one of the most intimate, private sort of stories I've ever sort of exposed myself to through song. My wife Susan, who I just mentioned, was working and living in London for about a year. She's Australian, but she was living in London the late 80s, about 87, 86, 87. And Mental as Anything was on tour, and we were in London. And so I rang her up because we had lots of mutual friends, and I knew she was in London, so I rang her up, and we just went to the secondhand markets, and I bought her the first Nina Simone record, Little Girl Blue, which was, fantastic record, and Nina Simone's such an incredible, artist herself. And in '87, around that time, My Baby Just Cares for Me had been re-released as they made a claymation video for it, and it was 30 years since almost 30 years since that song had been released on her first record, her debut record, Little Girl Blue. So that was a big hit for her, unexpected hit 30 years later for Nina Simone. So I bought the records because I loved her so much, Nina Simone, and gave it to Susan, and we went back to her bedsit with that record. So that sort of appears in the song, and it's pretty much a loose but specific sort of account of our time in London.
Yeah, which song best describes the relationship with Susan? This song or the song Bored Wife?
Both. That's how life is, isn't it? It's not all one way or the other. Bored Wife came out. By that time we had a couple of kids, and they were just very small and toddlers, and I think I was recording in the little downstairs. We had a little basement sort of room studio at that stage in the house I lived in, and I was down there with Reg, and we were recording. We were doing lots of demos down there, and I think she could hear us under the floorboards, probably having quite a good time making music and talking, and probably having a beer here and there. And she was upstairs looking after the children. I think that's when she just said, "Oh, I'm so bored," and
yeah.
One day. And so that song was, that's another true story, basically.
Yeah, for viewers, Bored Wife is not on the new album. There is a re-recorded version on Medicated Spirits, one of my favorite Peter O'Doherty songs.
Do we need a spaceman to work it all out? Do we need an alien to calm it all down? Do we need a boogeyman to follow us around? Or do we just need a hairy old man on a cloud? A hairy old man with a beard who lives on a cloud.
But let's go on to the title, The Fucking Idiots. Reg, what could you tell us about the song Fucking Idiots?
Well, it's kind of it's another pointless rant, really, but it's written from the point of view of a spaceman, an alien who's observing the Earth and basically scolding humans for being such violent, competitive, irrational idiots. Really, I mean, it's particularly annoying. I mean, it's annoying because at the moment we've got pretty serious problems facing the world, and yet we've still got these ridiculously enormous armies and these belligerent nation states, still squabbling with each other. So it seems totally annoying and ridiculous, and untenable that we've got that situation, but unfortunately we have. Got an interesting structure too, because the verses are sort of like a one chord talking blues almost, and then the choruses are like more like 60s pop. So it was kind of hard knitting the two bits together. When I was writing, I thought, it's almost like a key change to it. Goes from E to C. So it's kind of, I thought this is too weird. It doesn't really work, but it kind of did work in the end.
Oh, it totally worked.
Now I'm on that I'm on the wrong side of the bed. Did you run out of patience? Did you run out at the end while I'm sitting still? While I'm sitting still. While I'm sitting still. While I'm sitting still.
Now let's go on to Sitting Still. Peter, what can you tell us about that song?
Not a lot. It's it's just a sort of existential song, I suppose, about being, getting just caught up in the day-to-day world. You get caught up in doing how relations turn into one thing where one person's on one trajectory, on one tempo, and the other one's on another, and it's hard to always make those things align when you're in a relationship. And the song talks about that, and also about the reality of paying bills, and the difficulties of that, again, day-to-day life. So it's very much a sort of domestic sort of song, I suppose.
Now, Peter, the first instrumental on the album is Olive Hollow. Where did that come from?
Well, we both have a lot of songs that we write that never actually eventuate into finished songs. And then apart from that, you might have a song, half recorded or quarter recorded with some fragments of lyrics, verse, maybe some chorus, or just a melody with no words. And I've got tons and tons of that stuff, and I'm sure Rich does too. And so there's a lot of instrumental things. I was just sort of going back through the stuff that I recorded on my phone, and I've got like literally several hundred of them. And I just landed on a couple of things. I thought, that's pretty good, and I like the figure in that one. It was a sort of slightly psychedelic kind of folk psychedelia kind of feel, and I like that. I love that sort of stuff. So it just came out of that, and just started mucking around with it with the recording, and still didn't have any lyrics for it. And in the end, I just thought, what's easier not to battle with trying to stitch lyrics to it. And that's a whole other area, trying to finish a song with, and that's why, in a way, we have had big gaps in albums, because it's not like we're just finishing songs that we feel, that's a good song that needs to be recorded. We're writing all the time, and so in the end, whatever percolates up to be the ones that are the strongest go down. But we had a couple of these things as instrumentals. This one, and we'll talk about the other one later on. But we just felt that we often jamming together anyway, so that's a big feature of what we do. And when we play, we often we can extend songs out, and we can have big long instrumental passages through songs. So we thought, why not? That's it's something we love doing. So and I put a bit of organ on it. It started to sound a little bit proggy, So I got it's nice to have a bit of prog and psychedelia all stitched in there.
We're all on the sheep walk, cloud acclaimed. We're all doing the sheep walk. Chrome balustrades will keep you from falling out of the line. These golden chains will keep you from falling over in the yard, out of the road.
Now, the next song, Sheep of the Long White Cloud. Reg, what is that song about?
Well, it's obviously slightly ridiculous, but it's it's about New Zealand because the long white cloud is New Zealand. You may not know that.
No.
Aotearoa.
Yeah, New Zealand is referred to as the land of the long white cloud. I think, is that what Aotearoa means in Maori?
Yeah,
In Maori, I think
Aotearoa
it probably is.
is
Yeah,
the
so-
land of the long white cloud, more or less.
But I mean, New Zealand is dominated by sheep rather than people. There are more sheep than people. So, so the sheep do actually sculpt the landscape, by trimming the grass and by walking around the hills. They put these sort of striations around, so the hills end up looking a bit like ziggurats, because they've got these kind of. Anyway, I mean, obviously the sheep do sculpt the landscape in New Zealand. So it's talking about it, but it's also talking about the fact that art critics are saying that. It's also talking about how ridiculous art critics and some of the ridiculous aspects of judging things or judging music or judging art can be. So it's kind of about that. Plus, it's got a couple of comments about crowd, how I don't like crowds or mobs or over enthusiasm. I think is a bad thing for people. So there's a few other slightly personal things that.
I better calm down a little bit.
Ride together on your motorbike, got the butter in the bag and we're feeling alright. Round the bends with the flashing lights behind us, gonna push our luck tonight. Round the bends, gonna push our luck tonight.
The next track, The Ballad of Clayton Luby. What is that about?
Yeah. Well, Clayton Luby was a guy I went to school with from late primary school through high school. A guy that early on, when I first knew him, I would have sort of avoided him because he was a little bit, he was dangerous. Sort of guy who'd get in fights, and he was a fairly sort of strong-willed, crazy sort of nut, really. But I learned to. I sort of got on the right side of him later on because as you get older, you start to, like the same music, and he liked art, and he was a very good surfer, great surfer. So I sort of knew lots of surfers. I lived up on the northern beaches of Sydney, going to school up there. So it was like a surfy high school, and the school was built on the sand dunes right behind Avalon Beach up there. And look, he was just one of there was a lot of fairly antisocial, guys who took a lot of drugs and were great surfers and just lived life, off the mainstream and out of the mainstream. And Clayton did that for the rest of his life. He passed away about two years ago, but he had a sort of wild life, like a pirate, really. He was probably in and out of jail a couple of times. Spent, I think, 2 years in a Japanese jail for trying to get hash in and out of the country, and which was, why would you do that? He would do stuff that you think, oh, you shake your head, why? You're nut, But he was a good guy. I saw him only a few years ago, and he was still really interested in art. His uncle was a well-known Australian artist from the sort of 60s and 70s, and so he had that kind of bohemian and art and surf and music sort of thing going. So he was a good guy, and once he passed away, I just felt like there was a story in there about him that could be told. So
Yeah,
that's the song. So it sort of dovetails with my own experience as a teenager. So there's a couple of verses that are really just talking about myself, and my first job at a BP service station, pumping petrol. That's all. That was my sort of part of the story, and then other parts of the story are him, spending time in the Japanese jail, and he ended up living in Bali. So he's one of those interesting guys, and that I sort of admired, but I wouldn't want to be in his shoes exactly.
Yeah, I think we all have guys like that in our lives. I'm sure I could probably come up with 7 or 8 different Clayton Lubys from my life.
Yeah, there's a few more I knew about too, but
yeah.
But he had such a good name, it just had to be turned into a song.
Yeah.
There's no more traveling, the clocks are running slow, days flying by like there's no tomorrow, there's nowhere to go. I don't have a meaning,
Now, Peter, No More Traveling is another song of yours. What can you tell us about that song?
Oh, I suppose that's another song about, being locked down once everything's shut down up here, as it would have been the same in America, I'm sure, and across the world. We went into that sort of lockdown thing where we just weren't traveling. And as Reg was saying before, we weren't even allowed to travel more than 5 kilometers from our homes for a while there. And I was sort of, just surmising, on behalf of my neighbours and other people that I knew. Like, it was, for me, I actually quite enjoyed it because I got to just make art and paint and make music. But for a lot of people, it would have been really, really tough, especially if you're an older person living on your own, or and I was sort of speculating as to how that would affect people in the song. So there's it's sort of, I talk a bit about that, just a little bit about, like, the motorhome jacked up, like no one was traveling, and there's a whole lot of grey nomads, as they call them, going out around Australia at all times, and all that just stopped. Everything stopped. So it was a very unusual time, the whole thing, when you think we've been through this amazing sort of like an experience that the whole world shared for a couple of years, which have never happened before, so very unusual. You're even walking down the street, you would sort of avoid people, walk around each other, and we had masks on, and it was a really interesting science fiction sort of reality that we're in for a couple of years.
Yeah,
still are in a way, it's still happening.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Will it yet be thus, always on the bus? You never make a fuss when you're trying not to fall into the mainstream, trying not to fall between the cracks, trying not to fall into a bad dream. Oh.
Will it yet be thus? Reg, what is that song about?
I'm not sure. No, will it yet be thus? It does sound slightly biblical or something, doesn't it? It's vaguely just about, being, spending a life, I guess, of, staring out the window and daydreaming and not being really part of the mainstream. And, and again, the bridges are slightly critical of, bad humans, or, aggressive males or corporations or whatever, which is an obsession I can't really stop ranting about in several songs.
All those buffheads.
All those buffheads. So a vaguely semi-autobiographical song, I suppose. It's got no drums to speak of.
Yes,
which is interesting.
I think that song has a certain sort of it's a folky sort of sound, but it's with no drums, but it's got a sort of certain fragility in it too, just even the way Regis sings it.
Invisible things can't really hurt you, but sometimes they do. All of those things don't really hurt you, but sometimes they do. Things like a cancer or maybe a virus, things like the bugs in your phone, things like the small things that hide right inside us, things that won't leave you alone. Things like a nightmare.
Now let's go into the song Invisible Things. Reg, what can you tell us?
Well, again, it's just, I suppose it's a fairly obvious comment on all of the things that are either invisible or relatively invisible that affect us quite deeply, like the weather or the future, which are slightly abstract, invisible things. And talking about viruses and cancer, which is applicable at the moment, I suppose, even though the song was written a little bit before the pandemic. Or maybe it wasn't. No, it was actually. Yeah, it was. So again, a mixture of slightly, a couple of vaguely personal observations and lots of general observations about the things that affect people that are not visible to the naked eye, perhaps.
Yeah, we'll play anywhere without a stage, on a chair from the corner of a back room. Is there anybody out there? Is anyone out there?
Now, the next song I want to talk about is the song Back Room. Peter, what can you tell us about that?
Yep, and I suppose it must be a bit of a one-track record on this one. You know, it's like a one-trick pony, because it's, again, you know, I guess about, you know, coming out of the situation with COVID and not going out to play live gigs, and as you know, we sort of didn't do the band anymore. We didn't go and play gigs, but we did do quite a few shows together in this room that I'm sitting in, where we do all our recording. We did Facebook shows, just the two of us. So we were digging back into our back catalogue of songs, the Dog Trumpet and Medals and Anything as well. Songs that we, you know, really hadn't ever played live, some of them, and other songs we hadn't looked at or played for, you know, for 40 years. So it was interesting. It was good for us. But yeah, that song just touches on that kind of idea of, you know, being in a back room and playing to this invisible crowd, because you're sort of talking and playing to people, but you know, it's only through the phone. The phone is just sort of sitting on a bench, you know, aimed at you. You know, is there anyone there? You know, so it was a bit like that, and just talking about a bit about sort of, you know, about the landscape of Sydney and the commuter traffic, and how everything did change. You know, the roads went very quiet for a while. I don't know, wasn't like a literal sort of narrative about that, but you know, that was kind of touches on, again, on all those sort of areas of that experience.
The last track on the album is another instrumental, and it's called Tudor Blues. What can you tell me about that?
Well, I mean, that was one we'd actually recorded previously, and I don't know how long ago was it, Peter? It was a few years ago, and
well, it was left from from the batch of songs from Great South Road, the album.
So from 3 or 4 years ago, and
yeah,
and we, you know, we played it again and thought, that sounds pretty good, and we didn't really add anything to it. I don't think it was just need to be mixed, and but I mean, one interesting thing about it is that part of the melody, I hadn't realised it until after we recorded it, was stolen from one of my own songs from Lord and Lady Pumpkin, I think.
Yeah.
It's just part of the melody of the guitar riff is from it. So it's good. It's recycling. It's sustainable songwriting.
Well, and one thing you do find, you know, with songwriters is that you'll get familiar with the songwriter's style just because they do certain phrases and certain melodic sort of sequences,
certain chord progressions that you tend to fade.
Yeah.
You'll reuse.
So that's all right.
Okay, now those are the songs that make up the album Shadowland. Were there any other songs recorded that you just chose to leave off the album?
There was a couple that we started but didn't finish. I think one of mine and one of Peter's, maybe even two of Peter's. But but we'll fiddle with them further as time goes on. But no, basically we used pretty much all we'd recorded.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much, and there might have been a couple of other songs that we had almost finished, like new songs that just didn't have time to make it to the record level. So we with a bit of luck we'll keep recording fairly soon. I think that's what the pattern in the past is, when we release a record and then probably not do anything like particularly together as far as recording or working on new songs for quite a long time. Just leave it for a long time and then gradually start to sort of add in a couple of songs. But between the previous album, Great South Road, and this one, we just had nothing else to do. So we really just, as I said before, we just knuckled down and just really got stuck into it. So we will be playing more next year. We're going interstate in Australia, going to Tasmania and Victoria and Queensland. So it's going to be a change of pace for us. So I don't know if we'll get back into the studio straight away, but we've still got a few songs that to start, the songs to keep working on and put towards another record. You
guys signed a deal with Demon Music, and they reissued the back catalog on both colored vinyl and CD, which means that your catalog is much more easier to come by than it was previously. Now, are you happy with the way that they've handled the catalog?
Yeah, I think they did a great job. They really they reproduced all the artwork very faithfully as well, and as well as putting them out on vinyl and coloured vinyl, which we hadn't done before. So, and they were really enthusiastic about doing it properly.
Are there any parting words you'd like to leave for the viewers?
Just that we hope the ones that listen to or purchase our music, we hope you enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed making it.
And it would be nice to actually come and play in places like America and Europe.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we will. But it's just been we've been through an odd phase. So who knows? It would be great to do something more interesting like that. Get out of New South Wales.
Anyway, that's it. I'd like to thank my special guests, Reg Mombassa and Peter O'Doherty of DOG Trumpet, for guesting with me on this episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Remember to check out their brand new album, Shadowland, now available, as well as their entire back catalog. Lots of great music. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Thank you, Reg. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everybody, for watching Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having us on the show.
Steve. See ya.
See you later.